Hey everybody, we're back taking another look at this Monster Hunter Wilds Ascendance trailer. Now, I already had a video talking about my first impressions, but since then, I've watched this trailer many more times and thought about it much more. And I have some new thoughts, a couple of things I didn't catch before, and there's quite a bit that I'm excited for. So starting here, kind of blurry, but I definitely didn't realize the very first time that I watched this, the first several times that I watched this, that this appears to be Nada. And I know there was some speculation that there could be a time skip after high rank, and I didn't think much about that. And even when I first realized that this was Nada, I thought, well, that doesn't necessarily mean there's a time skip. Technically, there's always some kind of time skip in between low rank and high rank and master rank slash G rank. There's always a few comments about, well, it's time to come out of retirement, or things have been quiet for a while now, meaning that weeks or possibly even months have gone by. So I didn't think that meant too much, but the evidence did begin to pile up with, first of all, he seems to be quite a bit bigger than he was before. And we'd seen children ride sacreds, so it didn't seem that strange to me that he was out here on his own. But my thinking is that since he doesn't seem to be in actual hunter armor, maybe a variation of it, I still don't think he's going to be a full-fledged hunter. I think he's going to be part of the expedition that's taking us to this new map area. And speaking of this new map area, my theory is that because there are guardian monsters here, guardian monsters are going to start leaving this area, falling from this area into other parts of the map. I think that there's some kind of power source that's potentially keeping everything levitated up here. And perhaps what we did with the dragon torch or some other thing that happened, it's affecting things. So maybe some of the islands start to fall, and from those islands, guardian monsters are going to appear because we see later in the trailer that there's Guardian Deshagama in what looks like the Windward Plains. Another theory that I had was that we would possibly be able to travel between the islands. I was so wrapped up in absorbing all the visuals, I didn't even realize that we see the Sacred do exactly that. Also, there was a developer message that came out shortly after this did, and they explicitly say that we're going to be able to travel between these different islands. Now, will we be able to get into that castle slash city like structure we see in the background? I don't know, but it definitely seems like we might only be getting shown the first or one of the first main zones of this map. Now, these monsters still don't know what they are. I said they reminded me of Kurapeko, and they definitely do, but subspecies or variant might have been a bit of a stretch because they're similar, but they're definitely not quite Kurapekos. So I might have been off on that one. But it does beg the question, it makes sense why Guardians would be here. And in Old Wyveria, Zhu Wu was there as a scavenger slash assassin, taking out the other Guardians, but we didn't see other monsters there besides that. It was just Guardian monsters. So why would there be other monsters here? Well, a flying monster, that makes perfect sense. Flying monster could always fly up here and maybe think of it as a relatively safe place away from predators, but I wonder, will we see other monsters that aren't just flying monsters up here? Lore-wise, I'm not sure if that would make sense, but I guess we'll see. Still shot of these not Kurapekos getting ready to swoop in. I really like the idea that it seemed like you were fighting one main. I need to stop calling them Kurapekos because I'm going to start doing it by accident. One main monster and then the rest join in for attacks, because I feel like the pack mechanic could use something a little more scripted and refined. For example, when you fight a whole pack of Deshagama, if you do enough damage to some of them, they'll just wander off on their own. And it's easy enough to just dung pod one or two of them to try to get the one that you want isolated. Now, that's a good use of a mechanic that didn't feel like it needed that much use before, especially in the Rise Sunbreak World Iceborne. I barely used the dung pods. It was much more of a thing in the fourth gen and earlier games. But having the monsters fight in unison for certain attacks and not just have some of the pack wander off on its own. I think having them be a little more scripted and a little less chaotic for some monsters could be a good thing. I mean, fighting a bunch of not Kuliaku, Yonkakus in a big chaotic swarm, now that makes sense and that's pretty fun. Now, taking a look here, we see what we now know are called the boost bracers. In the developer's message, they said that's what it's called, and I got the impression that this is going to be a special mode you can activate, possibly by charging up your slinger. That's going to make me think that each weapon is going to get some kind of burst bracer attacks, probably something they use in conjunction with their slinger, ammo, very similar to how in World and Iceborne, certain weapons you could charge up with slinger ammo. Like with the gun lance, by loading in your slinger ammo, you could get an extra device, something that you could pierce the monster with and it would stay in them, and every time you hit it with shelling damage, you would get an extra explosion. And Insect Glaive, you could charge up your Kinsect so that it powered up longer, or I think could gather two extracts at once if you charge it up with slinger ammo. So I'm thinking weapons will get something like this. But they also say that weapons are going to get new combo abilities, and I think that's what we saw with the gun lance and it doing a perfect guard and then a follow-up counterattack. On a side note, looking at the default hunter here, he looks a lot like Nada. And that didn't really occur to me until I didn't realize Nada was at the very beginning of the trailer, and I kind of just assumed it was him. But then thinking about it, there is a bit of a resemblance there, and I wonder if that's on purpose. If we hadn't seen the hunter so much in like the introductory cutscenes of Wilds and the promotional material, I I could come up with some kind of weird head canon that that was supposed to be not a grown up, but obviously that wouldn't work because how would you know yourself as a child? Another thing mentioned in the developer message is that the director of Wilds Ascendance, or should I just call it Monster Hunter Ascendance? Because I feel like people say Sunbreak. They don't usually say Rise Sunbreak or Iceborne. Well, I guess they do say World Iceborne. But anyway, that the director is going to be the lead designer from Generations Ultimate and Iceborne. So I think that bodes pretty well for the challenge that we're going to see in this expansion. Now, I was never in that camp of thinking Wilds was too easy. The challenge was there if you want it, but there were certainly monsters and a good portion of the game where it wasn't necessarily hard. But like with most Monster Hunter games, it gets harder at the end, and so I never really agreed that it was too easy throughout. But I do think that Generations Ultimate and Iceborne are some of the hardest Monster Hunters you can play, especially Iceborne. So we'll see what that means for the expansion. Also, seeing Alma in a new outfit here and Gemma in her new haircut here definitely could lend some credence to the idea that there is a time skip. And I think Gemma's haircut is the only thing that really stood out to me the first time I saw the trailer. Didn't even really think about how some of these people were dressed differently. Gemma even has on different pants, I think. Very chaotic freeze frame here, but it also looks like using this burst bracer attack with the greatsword was an offset, I think, so we could get new offset abilities. Hopefully we get some offset abilities for weapons that didn't have it before, but definitely am happy to see some new ones because there were a few weapons I didn't love their offset option if they only had one. Sometimes I didn't like it if they had two. Looking at you, Switch Axe. And now we're gonna see the Elder Dragon reveal and a bunch of Guardian Deshagamas getting thrown around by Kushala Daora. I really hope that when they start bringing in these Elder Dragons, they're really going to emphasize the fact that they're calamity. The whole idea that an Elder Dragon changes the entire environment around them and interrupts the ecosystem and disrupts the natural food chain, everything. I'm hoping that and I wonder if the Elder Dragons appearing is going to factor into the weather system. There was a little bit of that in World and Iceborne, but it was mostly cosmetic. But since the weather effects seem much more impactful here, I wonder if we'll get new weather phases or phases in maps that belong from another map. Let's say I have no idea. I mean, we see Shaladiora here, and it looks like the Windward Plains. But what if Shaladiora was in the Orwell Basin? Could there be some kind of firestorm that he creates? Or could Namiel lead to a flood in Old Wyveria? I have no idea. But interesting. I'd be surprised if they didn't do something with the weather system in the different Elder Dragons. And once again here, when we're panning out, we see Nada, it looks like, but still not in real hunter's armor. No weapon. No weapon on the sacred. So I don't think he's going to be a full-fledged hunter yet. But I do think that he is going to be front and center on this expedition. I don't imagine we're going to leave him at camp like we had been. So that's interesting. And I also don't think he's going to be the center of the story. I think it's kind of going to be like in Base Wilds, where the main story is happening and his arc is happening alongside it, rather than he becomes the center of attention. And that's fine with me. I like Nada. So, and it felt like his arc was kind of stagnant post the end of the Wild story. The title updates didn't have anything for him to do, and it was just weird that he sat at camp that whole time, just running errands for you in the background through a menu. When once you see him first in his hunter leathers, I expect them to do a little bit more with that since he's some kind of apprentice hunter, but I guess we'll see here. And I still think some of these floating islands are definitely going to be monster arenas. Not saying that there'll be a Jin Dahad fight on one of these islands or anything like that, but I could see something. And then having Lao Shan Lung here, I'm really excited about that. Not because he's my favorite monster or anything, I never had a problem with him, but mainly because I feel like Wilds, I have a lot of faith in them to do some large scale siege fights well in such a way that doesn't make them repetitive. Like, I like the siege fights in World and Iceborne, but they did get pretty repetitive pretty quick. And I have faith that Wilds can turn those types of fights into spectacle events that also aren't repetitive, that also aren't you kind of sort of going through the motions a la Zora Magdaros, where it still feels challenging. So we'll see. And here, 2027. No clue when. I'm hoping no later than spring 2027. So maybe this time next year. I really hope it's not later than that. But it's a lot to look forward to. And I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, I hope you are too, and I can't wait to eat up every little bit of information we get from now until then, because I'm sure there'll be more promotional stuff, more videos, a few new monster reveals. As much as I'd like to go in a little blind and be surprised, there's no way I could resist. I'd be watching it the second it dropped, so yeah, if you like this video and want to see more Wilds talk, some more Wilds Ascendance talk, or just me playing other Monster Hunter games, currently doing a replay of Monster Hunter World right now, but I do want to get into Stories 3 pretty soon. So if you like this video, subscribe if you want to see more videos, and have a great day.